Hi, and thank you for joining this session within the month of Copilots. The topic of this session is going to focus on Copilot for M365. And we're going to be talking about how to unblock Copilot and clear the runway for a successful deployment. So to do that, we're going to look at some common blockers, challenges that arise for organizations and leaders of Copilot deployments. And then we're going to talk through some options that you have for how to mitigate those challenges. What I want you to leave this session with is an understanding that there are multiple aspects to consider when implementing Copilot. There are a few options for how to handle the various challenges that might arise, but none of them are showstoppers. We can mitigate and we can move forward. My name is Molly Rupert-Sullivan, and I am a Copilot adoption lead. So what I'm going to be doing is compiling my own experiences in my own firm and at other organizations to show you what these common blockers are. And again, the options that you have for how to mitigate those. As we get into the slides, I do want to let you know that I let Copilot create these for me with just a little bit of editing, and I've left in the pictures that Copilot selected for us. Okay. With that, let's dive in. We're going to look at 4 areas of common blockers. So the first is data privacy and governance. Then we're going to look at user adoption and experience challenges, support and ecosystem requirements, and everybody's number one, transcriptions. Okay. So the first round, data. Copilot has access to your Microsoft Graph. That's part of its power, right? It has access to your emails, your chat history, your files. And that's what we want it to have access to. That gives it the context and the power that it can provide to us. It also introduces a risk. It has access to everything you have access to. There's 2 things in particular to look at in this space. One is around data labeling. Copilot will respect data labels. But if a document is not labeled, Copilot has no idea that it's intended to be confidential if it is. So that's something to consider. Do you have data labeling practices in place right now? If not, that's probably something that should be implemented to support the secure use of Copilot. Another thing to look at is around oversharing. So again, Copilot has access to everything that you have access to. That's going to include things you don't know you have access to. Maybe things that were set to be shared with the entire organization, just to make it easier to share links, right? Instead of having to grant permission to this team's location every single time somebody wants to join that team, you've set it to public. And that means that everyone who has a Copilot license now has access to that team site. They did before because it was set to public. They didn't know that they had access to it, so they probably wouldn't have stumbled upon it accidentally. That passive approach doesn't work anymore because Copilot will actively go and look for anything that might be relevant to the prompt that you have given it. So an option here is to do an audit around oversharing and then reduce the number of things that are overshared within the organization. Third thing to look at in this space is the Copilot has access to enterprise search. There may be things that are included in that which are now raising the risk threshold with Copilot having access to it as well. You could remove some aspects from enterprise search, again, to reduce that risk. Now, those 3 things are technical solutions for data privacy and governance. There's also policy solutions, behavior solutions, and these are crucial. Even if you do the technical solutions, the behavior solutions are necessary as well. Responsible use has to be part of your rollout strategy. People need to understand what that means at your organization. That might include things like asking for consent before using Copilot in a Teams meeting, might include some guidance on what to say or not say during the context of that meeting, might include when you can and cannot use Copilot to create new documents, to create content. Also, how transparent should you be about your use of Copilot? All of these things are questions that people are going to have in using it. They need to understand the expectations the organization has of them and how to use it securely before you roll out. So again, this is crucial for risk management. Okay. The second area we're going to look at continues on the people thread here. So we're going to continue to look at the human side of the equation with adoption and experience. There's 3 things to consider within this challenge area. The first is to recognize that Copilot adoption isn't organic. People are going to need help. The second is that there is effort on the user part. there are some actions that they're going to need to take. And then the third is that there is a bit of skepticism in the ecosystem, and we need to manage for that. Addressing the first of these is pretty easy. Adoption isn't organic, people need help. Okay, let's help them. That's somewhat around communications, setting expectations, like we talked about a bit already, introducing the policies and guidelines for using it, and also, of course, showing them how to use it, providing training on how do we use Copilot specifically for our organization. That might also evolve into how do we use Copilot within a specific function or within a role. We also want to set expectations again around not just how to use it, responsible use, but what does value look like? What are we asking of you? Is there an expectation that you're taking surveys, providing feedback, things like that? All of this can be managed with a thorough change plan. I personally would encourage you to have a change plan that looks at this from a behavior standpoint, but that's a conversation for a different day. The second challenge is around the effort required. So we already talked about, it isn't organic. People are going to need help. That's a two-way street. There's also work that each user is going to need to do. And there are at least two aspects to that. On the one hand, there's learning Copilot. And on the other hand, there's the work of incorporating it into your daily use, making habits around using it, very literally remembering to use it. It does take time and effort to incorporate it into your work and to move beyond just sort of playing around and experimenting with Copilot. But we need people to do that in order for it to be truly valuable. And that's something I talk more about in another session, so you're welcome to check that out. But the point here really is that it takes a user commitment to learn Copilot and to make it a daily habit, and that's where the value is. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. And this might be considerations to take when planning out a Copilot deployment. Do you have a plan in place for change and support for the users? And what is the level of commitment that we can anticipate from the users you want to enable? That's at an individual level and also at a business or function leadership level. Do you have support from the organization for the time it will take? Again, in terms of setting expectations, Copilot will have productivity gains, it will have efficiency gains, quality gains, etc. But there is a learning curve before we get to that point. So making sure that everyone is clear on that and has the right expectations for how value will be realized with Copilot. And then the third area around adoption is skepticism, specifically contagious skepticism, right? In some organizations, there were some concerns with initial rollout. Maybe people didn't follow some of the steps that we've talked about. Maybe didn't know what to do with the tool, just in general didn't have the best experience initially. And now there's a little bit of noise in the system, and that's something that needs to be managed and overcome. And there may be some natural resistance because of either firsthand experience or feedback that you've heard from others. All of that can be mitigated. Part of how we mitigate that, whether it's based on experience or just starting out net new, is by curating the experience that people have with Copilot, providing guidance. So it's not just here's a license, best of luck, let us know what you think. It is here are specific things that we know have value and that you will find valuable personally. Do those first. Try these 3 prompts. Try these 2 applications. Do these things that we have already kind of tested and worked through. And again, we know they perform well. You know you're going to get the outputs that you want. You're generally going to walk away with a positive experience. And then let's evolve from there, right? We don't want to stop there, but we do want to kind of lock people in initially and let them have a positive experience and then grow from there, help them mature from there. Okay. Again, I mentioned before this idea of having a behavior-based approach. Also want to bring that up again, that will help people understand how to use Copilot and what to ask Copilot to do, how to incorporate it into your work. That helps make it a little bit easier on them. Right. The third blocker area that we're going to look at is around support and ecosystem requirements. There are some considerations for readiness from a risk mitigation standpoint that we already talked about a bit in the governance section. But then there's some readiness activities around your current Microsoft ecosystem as well. What people currently use or don't use could have a big impact on the value you can expect from Copilot. For example, I have had a surprising number of conversations with organizations who are interested in using Copilot but don't use Teams for their meetings. And you could still derive a lot of value out of Copilot for M365 without that, but it's also the easiest way for people to get value. So it's again a consideration, not a showstopper. We can still go forward, but is implementing Teams for meetings something you want to do first in order to get the most value? That's people's number one use case, is using Copilot in meetings as a note generation. Another thing to look at is how documents are stored. Do you use OneDrive? Do you use Teams? If neither, Copilot is going to be limited in what it can access. Going back to the beginning, its access to your graph data is part of its power. And without that context, without access to where those files are, it will be a little bit limited in what it can do for you. So again, not showstoppers, but considerations in what is the ecosystem in which we would be deploying Copilot, and are there any changes we want to make in order to do so at the highest value. Readiness also includes preparing to support your users. So, of course, this is a technology. We should have IT readiness. There should be IT support. There are also other aspects to that, some of which is more from a governance standpoint, a steering committee type standpoint. You want to have your legal department in the boat, for example, HR, security, etc., so that everyone understands what is it going to do, what are the risks that we're going to manage, all of that good stuff. And your IT organization needs to be a little bit ahead of the curve in order to provide support to others who are using Copilot. There's also an aspect of more of a value realization support. So a lot of the questions that come up around Copilot are not, hey, it's not working. It's not giving the outcome I expected. I prompted this application in this way, and I thought I would get X or Y, and I didn't. What can I do differently, right? It's more of a relationship management between the user and the tool. And that takes a little bit of a different support. Again, in terms of readying the organization, thinking through who will support Copilot. Is it primarily IT, and how do we enable them to have that aspect of value realization, relationship management, prompting support in their toolbox as well? And adding to that, the ability for peers in the community to support. We have found a lot of success at my own company and at others in creating an environment for community and peer learning and support, and also for development, right? We get better in working together. We're talking about Copilot for M365. It's individual and team collaboration tools, right? So already highly collaborative in this space. How do we share even more about how we're learning to use Copilot, how we're incorporating it, and make that information available? And then we can support each other and we can all learn and grow and improve together. There's also consideration to prepare the IT department and others for the evolution of Copilot. It is getting better. It is getting more functionality pretty much daily, maybe weekly. So there's some consideration, again, planning ahead for that. Are we going to be able to kind of keep up with that and provide updates and ongoing support? Some of the functionality that comes out, again, on a fairly regular basis is really new and exciting and game changing, and offers great new things that we want people to be able to do right away. So having some processes in place so that you have people to provide that information back to the rest of the user community. Right, now we are at our last one, which is around transcriptions. Last but not least, this is probably one of the most clear places to look at options to consider. There's essentially two, three if you consider not using Copilot in Teams at all, which I would not encourage. As a default, the way that Copilot works in Teams meetings is it creates a transcript file. With that said, I want to make sure it's clear that recording, transcription, and Copilot are three entirely separate things. things within a Teams meeting. Transcription and Copilot can work together. They do not have to. So again, the default is that Copilot in a Teams meeting will generate a transcript file, and it will use that transcript file to answer whatever you prompt it on. So some of the prompts you might give Copilot in a Teams meeting could be summarize the meeting. Did anyone mention my name in this meeting? What are the key themes? What are the open questions? All of that, when you have transcription on and a transcript file is created, can be asked during the meeting or can be asked after the meeting, because Copilot is using that transcript file to respond to those prompts. Now, why is this a challenge? The creation of these transcript files is a concern for a lot of legal departments in an organization where transcript wasn't previously used. Because again, it is separate from Copilot. It was available previously. A lot of organizations chose not to use it because transcripts are e-discoverable. So it's a set of data that we now have to consider retention policy for. There's concerns about the accuracy of transcripts, especially for multinational, multi-language organizations. But again, this is not a showstopper because we can run Copilot in meetings without transcription. What that means is that you do not have access to an actual file. So you can only use it during the life cycle of the meeting, but you can still do all of the same functionality during the meeting. So you can still prompt for a summary, action items, etc. You can still do my favorite, which is what I refer to as the rewind feature, where you could say, what was the question that was just asked, or somebody just said your name and you weren't really paying attention, and you could prompt Copilot with, what did that person just say? Or even, often people are going through and they're saying, top 3 things are, and at the end of that, you could say, hey, Copilot, what were the 3 things that Joe just mentioned? All of that is still available to us when we're running Copilot in meetings without transcription. Microsoft recently changed some of the terminology that you'll see around this. So it is an option when setting up Teams meetings to have Copilot only during the meeting or during and after the meeting. And the difference in that is transcription. Now, in terms of managing that, there are a couple different options as well. That could be managed through policy. We could say, we don't want you to use it with transcription in these certain types of scenarios, or that can be universally managed within the domain to actually remove transcription as an option. And in so doing, in those options in your team setting, choosing the during and after option actually prevents Copilot from being used at all, because it would have to generate a transcript and it cannot. So in doing that, you can enterprise-wide disallow transcriptions and enable Copilot only to be used during the meeting, which again, same functionality, just no follow-up after the meeting and no transcript file is created. So none of that information is retained. What that does do is it changes the behavior a little bit. So the information needs to be copied during the meeting to somewhere else in order to be retained. But it also obviously reduces the risk profile because we're not creating this file. And you can still use Copilot as a note taker in meetings, which is everybody's favorite use case. So that brings us to the end of our common blockers and mitigations for each of them. Hopefully the takeaway is clear here that there's no right way or wrong way to leverage Copilot in meetings or otherwise. There are many paths forward and many options to consider, many ways in which to realize value with Copilot. I will offer in closing that my recommendation is that there is only one non-negotiable here, and that is to provide direction on how to safely use Copilot, to have responsible use policies and procedures in place so that your users feel like they know what they're doing, they are doing it safely, they are complying with regulations, and everyone can feel good about using Copilot responsibly. Thank you for listening to my session. If you are interested in subscribing to Copilot Connection, here's the information with which to do so.